efforts are going to have the same functionalities that are did.
And while it remains to be seen what will happen, arguably opening the door for more voter fraud.
I mean, definitely it's going to be harder to catch voter fraud in these states. I mean, I think even the election officials themselves, if you would talk off the record with any of them, would say, yes, we had a tool that detected voter fraud and we pulled out of it.
All right, time for a quick break. We'll be back in just a second.
Hey, Ron Elving here. Check out our latest bonus episode in your feeds now. It's our trivia game for Politics Podcast Plus listeners.
All right, Paula, are you ready to play?
I am.
Where we test your knowledge of the latest political news.
Denver?
Ooh, you're getting closer.
I might have led you astray.
That makes me feel better. Thank you, Ron.
You too could be a contestant in a future bonus episode by signing up for Politics Podcast Plus. If you already have, thank you. If you haven't, here's your chance. You get bonus content, sponsor-free listening, and get to support NPR and the work we do. Go to plus.npr.org. And thank you.
This message comes from NPR sponsor Teladoc Health. Top to bottom, front to back, and inside and out, every part of you is connected. So the way you care for your health should be too. That's why Teladoc Health provides connected care, bringing together virtual primary care, mental health support, and care for chronic conditions to help you get well and stay well so you can live healthier ever after. Get started at teladochealth.com/NPR. This message comes from NPR sponsor Citi. They're not writers, but they help you shape your financial story. They're not a startup, but their innovation labs create new tools to help keep your information secure. They're not architects, but they help build stronger communities. With global expertise and over 2 centuries of experience, Citi provides tools, insights, and guidance to help businesses thrive. They're not just any bank. They are Citi. Learn more at citi.com/weareciti.
This message comes from NPR sponsor United, the first airline to commit to achieving net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050 without depending on traditional carbon offsets. United Airlines, good leads the way.
Here at Planet Money, we bring complex economic ideas down to earth. We find weird, fun, interesting stories that explain the way money shapes our lives. Inflation, recessions, the price of gas, we've got you. Listen now to the Planet Money podcast from NPR.
And we're back. Mara, there's one thing that's worth talking about here. Miles' investigation found that Republican primaries played a big role in this move away from this voter fraud detection tool called ERIC that we've been talking about. Some Republican candidates were feeling pressure from voters who'd been consuming this fringe right news and had taken in these conspiracy theories Miles was talking about. What does that reflect about the current state of the GOP?
Well, I think it reflects the fact that the GOP is powered by the engine of Trumpist voters, MAGA voters, conspiracy theories. This is the base of the current GOP, and if you're going to run in a Republican primary, as many of these election officials want to do as they move up the ladder, you're going to have to appeal to that base, and that base believes a lot of things that aren't true. I think that you see something similar happening in Congress, where you have the majority of the Republicans in the House voting to overturn the results of the 2020 election, and then later voting for a government shutdown and to default on the U.S. debt. This is a party that has really moved very far to the right.
Well, it's interesting, too, because, this ERIC system, Sarah, obviously I've spent a lot of time thinking about it, but I don't know that the average voter necessarily knows what ERIC is. I think Frank LaRose is a really interesting person. He is the Secretary of State, Republican Secretary of State of Ohio, pulled that state out of ERIC, and is now running for U.S. Senate in what is ostensibly a battleground state. So he is looking ahead at a Republican primary, but if he were to come out of that, would something like this actually affect his ability to win over independent voters? I honestly have no idea. Does the average independent voter in Ohio know about ERIC, care about ERIC? I don't know.
And this kind of brings me to my next question. You've both sort of touched on parts of this, and let me see if I can put it into words. I guess I'm wondering, what's the larger objective here? And by that I mean, are these Republican officials pulling out of this widely used system? Is it out of political concern that we were just talking about? Is it a sincere concern in some cases about voter fraud? Or is there a case to be made that something else is going on, maybe an effort to muddy the waters in voters' minds about the security of the election system? I mean, without reading people's minds, what do we know about what might be the larger objective?
I kept hearing from people involved in this story that voters in Republican primaries are thinking about this. They're reading the places that these conspiracy theories are, and they care about it. And so I think it is, in the action of pulling out, pretty directly linked to wanting to win over those voters, and maybe potentially not to some larger scheme involving democracy. But I will say we are seeing that people are jumping on this to try to affect democracy now that these states have pulled out. We've seen a number of far-right influencers trying to create their own fraud-finding software, trying to pitch it to secretaries of state in these states that have pulled out of ERIC to try to kind of fill this election data void. And so I do think I talked to one professor who told me, essentially, by pulling out of ERIC, the entire democracy doesn't like crumble on itself the next day, right? But over time, these states who pull out of ERIC will have slightly less up-to-date voter rolls. What that means is that feeds the cycle of being able to point to inaccuracy, not necessarily fraud, but being able to point to inaccuracy on voter lists as evidence of some broader corruption. I think it definitely feeds that cycle.
You know, we've been talking a lot about this issue as a motivating one for essentially Republican-based voters, but Mara, we've also seen this motivate Democrats, right? I mean, in 2022, voters were motivated by concerns about democracy. It became a kitchen table issue in a way I don't think we'd seen before, at least for a while.
And we certainly didn't see it at the time. We were confused. In 2022, we all thought there would be a red wave because voters, we thought, top concern was inflation. Guess what? They had other concerns, and one of them was January 6th and threats to democracy, even though they didn't maybe express it that way. But I think that it is an issue, and Joe Biden has continued to run on this, and I don't know if it'll get as granular as having a political discussion on the stump about ERIC, but I do think voters are concerned about democracy.
Yeah, the two things are so clearly linked. I think about Brad Raffensperger, who's somebody who stood up to Trump.
Secretary of State of Georgia.
Secretary of State of Georgia, that's right. And then was able to win pretty handedly in 2022. Also, one of ERIC's biggest defenders. And so I think that all of these things are kind of linked in that way, that the people who are willing to kind of stand up in that way are also seem to be linked to other stories like this.
Well, thank you, Miles, for all your great reporting.
Yeah, thanks.
All right, let's leave it there for today. I'm Sarah McCammon. I cover the campaign.
I'm Miles Parks. I cover voting.
And I'm Mara Liasson, national political correspondent.
And thank you, as always, for listening to the NPR Politics Podcast.
This message comes from NPR sponsor Citi. They're not an airline, but their network connects global businesses in nearly 160 local markets. With over 2 centuries of experience, they're not just any bank, they are Citi. More at citi.com/weareciti. This message comes from NPR sponsor American Cancer Society. No one ever wants to hear that someone they care about is struggling through their cancer journey. At the American Cancer Society, they work to make sure no one has to hear it again. Learn more at cancer.org.
Did you know you are physically adapting to all your swiping, scrolling, and tapping?
We're changing our bodies and what they're able to do through our habits.
NPR's Body Electric, a special interactive series investigating how to fix the relationship between our tech and our health. Listen in the TED Radio Hour feed wherever you get your podcasts.
Israel barraged Gaza with airstrikes today. Meanwhile, 3 aid convoys carrying food, water, and medication entered Gaza through its border with Egypt. The Biden administration is urging Israel to delay a ground invasion. It wants more aid to enter Gaza and more time for Hamas to free the hostages it's holding. Okay, that is the news on the war. All of that is true, verified, fact-checked. Thank you, Laura. But so much else here is not. Why this war became a haze of misinformation.
Most of the content that has come from this war hasn't been necessarily by professional journalists with a camera person recording. It's been actual ordinary people with their smartphones just taking videos of what's going on and putting it online. And then obviously that needs to be verified.
Coming up on Today Explained.
A message from Chevrolet. The purchase of a new 2023 Chevy Bolt EUV may make you eligible for the Clean Vehicle Federal Tax Credit. Your eligibility to claim the tax credit depends on your own individual circumstances. You should consult with your own tax, accounting, or legal professional or advisor to confirm your eligibility for the credit, or if you have questions regarding your qualification to claim the credit. This information does not constitute tax, accounting, or legal advice.
Hey, it's Magic Johnson. Imagine you're doing something you love. Respiratory syncytial virus, or RSV, could cut it short. Despite usually causing mild symptoms, RSV can cause severe infections that may lead to hospitalizations in adults 60 and older and adults with certain conditions like COPD, asthma, or congestive heart failure. Talk to your doctor and visit cutshortrsv.com.
Sponsored by GSK.
It's Today Explained. I'm Noel King. So a lot of stuff circulating about this war is not real. What to do about that? Enter Cheyenne Sardarzadeh. He's a BBC journalist, and he's part of a team of journalists at BBC who look for and flag misleading or fake content that's gone viral. I asked Cheyenne first to just define misinformation.
So, I mean, the technical definition that most people who do this job seem to stick to is that misinformation is mostly content that is shared online which is false, but there's no malicious intent behind it. But disinformation, it takes it a notch above that. That's when, somebody is putting content out that is misleading and false because they think there'll be some gain for them from it.
Okay, so misinformation is mistakenly put out. Disinformation is deliberate. During this war, for the past 2 weeks, what sorts of things, what sorts of misinformation and disinformation are you seeing being spread?
I think it reminds me of the first few weeks actually, of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Very similar. We have had, in the first 2 weeks of this war, a torrent of misinformation online. Videos being shared and posted to you by tens of millions of people that have had nothing to do with the war. I have seen videos from past Israel-Hamas conflicts.
This video of an attack by Israeli forces on Gaza is in fact what it purports to be, but it's from May, not from this current set of attacks.
From the war in Syria, from the Ukraine war, from some of the uprisings in the Middle East. I've seen content from football celebrations. I've seen video game footage.
Take this video saying Hamas militants started a new airstrike on Israel. You see that? That video. That is actually from a video game. It's not even real. You see the exact same video posted to YouTube here.
I've seen military exercise videos on YouTube that have been shared on, TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, X, and have been viewed millions and millions of times.
This video allegedly shows dozens of Hamas fighters paragliding into Israel. Through a reverse image search, we were able to geolocate the area. The white building in the background is the military academy in Cairo.
And it's not just videos, by the way. Same thing with images. I mean, in some cases, same thing with posts that do not contain any video or image, but make a very incendiary claim during the fog of war that shocks people, and then it turns out it's completely unsourced. There's no evidence for it. It's somebody's just made it up, and then we get into people who for whatever reason create fake accounts, say fake IDF account or fake Hamas account or fake account from an Israeli politician, and try to get engagement off of it. So I've seen all of those and some more.
I want to understand how your job works in real time. Can you walk me through the process of checking one of these claims that you've discovered is misinformation?
Yeah, sure. I'll give you two. One misinformation, one disinformation. So obviously we know the way this particular conflict started was that on the Saturday, 7th of October, Hamas militants infiltrated Israel and killed something between 1,200 to 1,300 Israeli citizens. And we know that some Israeli citizens were taken hostage during that attack that was unleashed on Israel. So a rumor began on the Sunday morning that some senior Israeli generals had been taken hostage by Hamas militants. And then a video came out in the afternoon, our time in the UK, that got millions and millions of views online. It was on X, it was on Facebook, I saw it on Instagram, I saw it on TikTok. It's a 30-second video, and in it you see a big black van, and then you see several men wearing military uniforms who look like security agents and balaclavas, with 3 men being escorted by security agents, and the caption on the video said, "Several high-profile Israeli generals captured by Hamas fighters," quote unquote. That's what it said. When I saw that, I was like, okay, we have reporters on the ground, they're not telling us anything like it. They've contacted the IDF, they're not saying any of the generals have been taken hostage. So let's properly check this. And if you check the video, there's a moment in the video that one of the security agents wearing a military uniform has the logo DTX on there. And I just searched for DTX, and lo and behold, DTX is the state security service of Azerbaijan. So then I thought, okay, this video must have been shared at some point somewhere of the Azerbaijani security service arresting some people. So I went on YouTube, went on Instagram, went on TikTok, and started putting search terms, using Google Translate in the local language.
All right. Leaving early today. Gave enough hours yesterday. I'm just gonna skip out. Did another trial run of Cincy Lang. Out. It's about 75 degrees here in Hamilton, Ohio.
My turn.
All right, go ahead. We learned he's facing federal count, interfering with the flight crew as well.
Obviously a really scary situation, but do you know anything about this off-duty pilot? What kind of triggered this incident?
His name is Joseph Emerson, and there are some wild new allegations in federal court papers that were filed today. According to the FBI, the crew said Emerson was chatting casually with the pilots, gave zero indication of anything wrong during the beginning of the flight. But at some point, as the jet moved over Oregon, the first officer saw Emerson throw off his headset and say, quote, "I am not okay." The crew says that's when Emerson tried to grab the fire suppression system for the engines. The FBI says the pilot then grabbed Emerson's wrist and physically engaged with him, quote unquote, for about half a minute. The pilot asked Emerson to leave the cockpit, which Emerson did. And Emerson then allegedly told the flight attendant, you need to cuff me right now, or it's going to be bad.
Wow, so once this plane landed, did investigators then talk to Emerson?
The FBI says they did, and that Emerson told agents that he had a, quote, nervous breakdown, had not slept in 40 hours. He allegedly told the agent that he pulled the emergency shut-off handles on the engines because, quote, I thought I was dreaming, and I just want to wake up. The agent said Emerson denied taking any medication, though the FBI also says Emerson did talk about psychedelic mushrooms and said, quote, it was his first time taking mushrooms, unquote. What is not clear, though, is if he was actually under the influence of mushrooms during the flight. Emerson did allegedly tell the FBI agent that 6 months ago he had become depressed. And I should note, that even before these latest details came out, the incident was reviving concerns across the industry about the mental health of pilots, whether they are getting the treatment they need.
And Joel, what would prevent pilots from getting that sort of treatment?
It's complicated. There's a stigma around seeking mental health treatment. Pilots are concerned that they will be grounded if they seek treatment, and the use of antidepressants by pilots is tightly regulated. Dennis Tager is a veteran pilot and a spokesman for the Allied Pilots Association, which represents pilots of American Airlines.
What's at stake is you think that your job is at stake. The income for your family is at stake. I'm going to be grounded, lose my job, lose my home. And these are all awfulizing thoughts that pilots go through that stop them from getting the care that they need if they need it.
Federal regulators are aware of this issue and say pilots should
To date, Hamas has released 4 hostages who had been held since the October 7th massacre that claimed 1,400 lives. Some 200 other hostages are still being held in Gaza, and we are going to focus now on the central role that Qatar has played in negotiating the releases. This is not the first time the wealthy Gulf nation has stepped in as a mediator. For more, we have brought on Badr Al-Saif. He's a professor of history at Kuwait University. Welcome.
Thank you.
Give me a little bit of the history here. How Qatar's influence with Hamas affords it a unique position to try to influence Hamas.
Let me first speak about the way that Qatar perceives itself in the region. It, as a small state in a region dominated by large forces, it wanted to really shine and play an outsized role by presenting itself as a mediator. They've done this in the past. They've successfully worked on deals that relate to Yemen in 2007, Lebanon in 2008, more recently Afghanistan, as you know, in 2021.
Yeah, they helped get Americans
Iran
out.
just a few weeks ago.
This is such helpful background. Let me steer us to that question that I started out with, which is, why would Hamas listen to Qatar?
Hamas has a different ties with Qatar. Qatar has been a very key interlocutor when it comes to presenting aid to Gaza infrastructure in the past. As you know, Gaza has been decimated a few times by Israel in the past, and that required a lot of building up. And the reconstruction has been largely bailed by various parties in the region, in the Middle East, but by Qatar as well. They also have representation, I believe, in Doha, just like they had with the Taliban.
In the capital.
Exactly. So it makes more sense to have that line open for them to intervene when they already have a relationship, which isn't the case, by the way, with a lot of the countries in the region.
And you spoke to this a little bit, but what is in it for Qatar? I understand that they want to play this role. Is this about increasing their leverage on the world stage for such a tiny country?
One, that's exactly it. Plus, Qatari foreign policy, as a small state, it requires a secure region for it to thrive. So they would like to see peace and prosperity become the mainstream in the region. That hasn't been the case unfortunately, for the Middle East. And they can afford this as one of the richest countries in the region, a small-sized population, large GDP. And don't forget, Qatar has also been a victim of a Gulf rift in the past few years when it was blockaded by different states. So in its world conception, no one should go through this again. And hence, it strives to work with other parties to reduce conflict.
So here is a challenge, which is Hamas is designated a terrorist organization by the U.S., by Israel, by others. How does Qatar navigate that, particularly in light of its status as a U.S. ally?
The way it has navigated the Iran card, all of the states that you've mentioned need someone to talk to a party that they're not talking to. So when you have someone that's understanding of Qatar that can relay accurate messages and to get their ideas through, that's helpful.
I mentioned there's still a couple hundred other hostages being held by Hamas, including Americans. Would you expect Qatar to continue to work with the U.S. on their watch?
Oh, definitely. I think we are undergoing a very intense negotiation, but let's not look at the size as well. Let's also look at the many, many lives lost from the Palestinians and the many, many prisoners also in Israeli prisons. So I think they're trying to look at it in a holistic manner.
How is this seen in other Arab capitals? Qatar's role as a mediator here.
Qatar's role as a mediator is welcome news. I mean, remember, this region tends to export a lot of bad news around the world, and seldom do we get good airtime. This is one of those good airtimes in which there is a country that's playing a constructive role, and it fits into the larger positive role that the Gulf states are playing on the world stage from the Middle East.
That was a professor of history at Kuwait University. Professor Al-Saif, thank you.
Thank you, Mary Louise.
This is All Things Considered from NPR News.
Today from the Ohio Newsroom, a historical look at Ohio's small Jewish communities. Today from the Ohio Newsroom takes you around the state, connecting you to news and neighbors from all over Ohio. I'm Kendall Crawford, and this week we're looking back to some of our favorite stories. Growing up in Lancaster, Austin Reed noticed the remnants of a Jewish community that had once lived there but disbanded before he was born. He decided to research them as a part of his scholarship at Capital University and found many more across the state. Now, he's working to unearth the Jewish history of small-town Ohio. He joins me now to talk us through his findings. Hi, Austin.
Hello, Kendall. Thank you for taking the time today.
You've researched 16 Jewish communities that have somewhere down the line shrunk in size or disbanded entirely. I'm curious, when you're doing this research and looking at these histories, have there been common threads between these different towns and their Jewish roots?
There are some commonalities, and I try, when documenting these histories, to tie what's happening very locally with larger national and global trends. There were two main waves of immigration that created these Jewish communities. The first was in the mid-1800s. There was a lot of political instability in Central Europe, and Jewish residents, along with many other people who weren't Jewish, immigrated to the United States to escape the political unrest and hopefully find better opportunities for their families. The later immigrants, and the largest of the two groups, were Eastern European Jews, and they really began to come to the United States between the years 1880 and 1924. These were the two groups that comprised the vast majority of the Jewish people in Ohio's small towns.
You mentioned this being a national trend. So is Ohio normal or an outlier when it comes to these Jewish small-town roots?
Yeah, Ohio's fairly typical, but because of where Ohio was in its industrial presence at one time, I think Ohio had an especially large draw for immigrant communities of all kinds. And so we don't see small-town Jewish life being as common everywhere in the U.S. I think it was especially common at one time in the Midwest.
In some of your research, you talk about these really vibrant communities in the 19th century, like Steubenville. You note that it once had more than 1,000 Jewish residents, but in 2013, its last synagogue closed down. So what happened there?
So Steubenville's population in particular peaked
about the late 1930s, early 1940s, and it's steadily been declining ever since. And this didn't just impact the Jewish community, but when you had a smaller number of families initially to work with, you don't have to lose as many people to out-migration or age as you would if you were a bigger community. You know, young people moving away for work and not returning, or the loss of critical jobs in some of these cities, and they weren't necessarily always replaced with other opportunities, and that economic shift in the town has created larger demographic changes.
So why is it important to keep the history of these Jewish communities alive?
For Jewish readers, it's often a way, I feel, for them to reconnect with their family's roots. Sometimes these were the very first places families settled after coming over from Europe, and those stories might get dimmed over the years, and this is a way to recover some of that and remember that Jewish life has existed beyond larger cities. And then for non-Jewish readers, I hope it's an accessible way for them to learn about this unique tradition in the American context, and what this particular community's done to support their communities where they're still living.
That's Austin Reed, a Jewish convert and researcher. Thank you, Austin, for talking with me.
Thank you so much for your time.
That's all today from the Ohio Newsroom. We'll talk with you tomorrow.
Support comes from The Well, a nonprofit providing programs, practices, and connection at the intersection of arts and wellness in Greater Cincinnati and beyond. From poetry to collaborative art making, from music to movement, events at The Well focus on community connection for youth and adults. Additional information at thewell.world.
Support comes from Columbia Acura, offering a complete selection of new and pre-owned luxury cars. Columbia Acura's new vehicle lineup and professional staff are available to serve you on Montgomery Road and I-275. More information at 530-0100 or ColumbiaAcura.com. Columbia Acura, precision-crafted performance.
Support comes from Pixel and Timber, a product development skunkworks located in Northside's historic business district. With its lean and collaborative approach to product design, development, and engineering, Pixel and Timber can help large companies develop new products, packages, and technologies with the speed and agility of a startup. Learn more at pixelandtimber.com.
Delhi near Bender, there's a wreck. There's one on Vine Street at Galbraith, and in Montgomery County, northbound Diamond Mill Road after Huffman Road, there is a wreck. Spotty showers possible tonight, otherwise look for a low of 56. Partly cloudy and 74 on Wednesday. It's 77 degrees now. This is All Things Considered on 91.7 WVXU.
From NPR News, this is All Things Considered. I'm Juana Summers.
And I'm Mary Louise Kelly. Tempers flared at the UN Security Council as Arab leaders and Palestinians called on diplomats to press Israel to stop its bombardment of Gaza. Secretary of State Antony Blinken says there should be more outrage focused on Hamas, which started this latest round of violence with an unprecedented attack on Israel. But the U.S. is nudging Israel to consider ways to get more aid to Palestinians, as NPR's Michelle Kellerman reports.
UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has been calling for a pause in the fighting to allow more aid to get into Gaza, and he's telling the Security Council that civilians must be protected. It was a message both to Hamas and to Israel.
Protecting civilians can never mean using them as human shields. Protecting civilians does not mean ordering more than 1 million people to evacuate to the south, where there is no shelter, no food, no water, no medicine, and no fuel, and then continue to bomb the south itself.
While he condemned what he called the appalling attacks by Hamas that set off this cycle of violence, he said this did not happen in a vacuum, pointing to Palestinian resentment of decades of Israeli occupation. Israel's Foreign Minister Eli Cohen was furious, calling this victim blaming. He canceled his meeting with Guterres, compared Hamas to the Nazis, and rejected calls for a ceasefire.
How you can agree to a ceasefire with someone who wants to kill and destroy your own existence? How? The proportional response to October 7 massacre is a total destruction to the last one of the Hamas.
Secretary of State Antony Blinken told the council the world should help Israel defeat terrorism, though he also suggested that Israel consider humanitarian pauses to allow more aid into Gaza. And the secretary urged UN members to help contain this conflict by sending clear messages to Iran and its proxies, who he says have attacked U.S. personnel in Iraq and Syria in recent weeks.
If you, like the United States, want to prevent this conflict from spreading, tell Iran, tell its proxies, in public, in private, through every means, do not open another front against Israel in this conflict. Do not attack Israel's partners.
Jordan's Foreign Minister Ayman al-Safadi said there are real fears that this conflict could spread.
There's the threat of this expanding into the West Bank, into Lebanon, into other fronts. None of us want that. We're all working against that.
But flanked by other Arab foreign ministers, the Jordanian official warned that the danger will continue as long as there are images of death and destruction in Israel's bombardment of Gaza. Hamas is still holding more than 200 hostages there, including Americans and other nationalities. Some family members of the hostages were at the UN today, too, calling on countries to pressure Hamas to free them. Michelle Kellerman, NPR News, the State Department.
One of Europe's hottest new hip-hop acts just wrapped up its first North American tour. They're called Kneecap and hail from Northern Ireland. And while their music has a lot in common with the rap you hear in the U.S. thematically, there is something surprising about how it sounds. NPR's Fatima Al-Kassab reports from Belfast.
It might sound like other rap music. The group Kneecap raps about partying and taking drugs and being
I'm hungry. What to eat? Arby's, Burger King. Thinking Burger King. Arby's sounds good too. What to do? Proximity for the win. It's been a while.
Second order whenever you're ready.
Alright, I'll take a number 1 meal, please.
Do you want cheese?
No, thank you.
What size is the drink?
I'll do a medium Coke, please.
Alright.
And I'll do a bacon cheeseburger and a side of onion rings.
What size?
Small.
Alright.
That's all.
1382 first one, thank you.
Thanks. Private number. Nope.
But by September, he'd been missing meetings and had disappeared from the public eye.
Oh, sorry.
And today, China's National Evening News Bulletin confirmed he's been formally dismissed. 第14号.
Sorry, sleeping at the wheel. Thanks. I'll go to the park and eat. Try to relax. West Washington Boulevard, and I'm going to the Jim Grimm Park next to my place. Alright, relax. Alright, home sweet home.